On the cold morning of January 15, 1947, Los Angeles was just beginning to stir. The smog hung low, the sun barely cutting through the haze, and the city's endless grid of streets buzzed with the quiet hum of early commuters. In the suburb of Leimert Park, a young mother named Betty Berzinger pushed her stroller along Norton Avenue, heading toward a shoe repair shop. She noticed something in the vacant lot beside the sidewalk, something pale, something still. At first, she thought it was a discarded mannequin, the kind department stores threw out when they changed their window displays. But as she walked closer, the illusion shattered. It wasn't a mannequin. It was a woman, and she had been cut in half. The body lay in the grass, posed deliberately. The upper half was arranged with the arms raised and bent at the elbows, as if in a grotesque parody of a pin-up pose. The lower half was placed a short distance away, legs spread, the skin scrubbed clean. There was no blood, not a drop, as if the crime had happened somewhere else and the body had been transported here like a macabre exhibit. The woman's face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth toward her ears, creating a chilling, permanent smile. Her body had been drained of blood. Her intestines had been tucked neatly beneath her. Whoever did this had taken their time. They had arranged her with precision, almost with pride. Berzinger froze. The stroller wheels stopped. The world around her seemed to fall silent. She turned and ran to the nearest house, pounding on the door, screaming for someone to call the police. Within minutes, the lot was swarming with officers. Within hours, the press had arrived. And by nightfall, the story had spread across Los Angeles. A young woman had been murdered, mutilated, and displayed in a way the city had never seen before. The LAPD quickly identified her as Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old aspiring actress from Massachusetts. She had been missing for several days. She had no family in Los Angeles. She had no stable job, no fixed address, and no clear circle of friends. She drifted through the city like a shadow, known to many, close to few. The newspapers gave her a name that would echo through history, the Black Dahlia. Detectives knew immediately that this was no ordinary murder. The precision of the cuts, the lack of blood, the staging of the body, all pointed to someone with medical knowledge or surgical skill, or a mind capable of planning something far darker than a crime of passion. The Black Dahlia case had begun, and Los Angeles would never be the same. Before she became the Black Dahlia, before the newspapers twisted her life into a spectacle, Elizabeth Short was simply a young woman chasing a dream. A dream that Los Angeles promised to thousands, but delivered to only a few. Born in 1924 in Medford, Massachusetts, Elizabeth grew up during the Great Depression. Her father abandoned the family when she was still a child, leaving her mother to raise 5 daughters alone. Elizabeth was fragile, often sick, and spent much of her youth recovering from respiratory problems. But she had something that set her apart. A striking beauty and a quiet determination to escape the life she had been handed. As a teenager, she became fascinated with movies, glamour, and the idea of reinvention. Hollywood wasn't just a place to her, it was a doorway, a chance to become someone new, someone unforgettable. In her early 20s, she drifted between cities, Miami, Santa Barbara, San Diego, always searching for opportunity, always living on the edge of stability. She worked as a waitress, lived in cheap hotels, and relied on the kindness of acquaintances. She dressed elegantly, spoke softly, and carried herself with a confidence that masked the uncertainty beneath. People remembered her, men admired her, women noticed her, but few truly knew her. By 1946, she had arrived in Los Angeles, the city of lights, illusions, and broken promises. She told friends she wanted to act. She wanted to be in pictures. She wanted to be seen. But Hollywood was a machine that consumed dreams faster than it created them. And Elizabeth found herself drifting again. From apartment to apartment, from friend to friend, from hope to disappointment. She became known for her all-black outfits, her porcelain skin, her dark curls, and her quiet, mysterious aura. Some say the press later twisted this into the nickname the Black Dahlia, inspired by a popular film noir of the time. Others say the name circulated among locals before her death. The truth is blurred, like much of her life. What is clear is this: Elizabeth Short was vulnerable. She was alone, and she was moving through a city where danger lived in the shadows. In the weeks before her murder, she was seen with several men. Soldiers, drifters, aspiring actors, and strangers whose names were never recorded. She had no stable home, no steady income, and no one to protect her. Her final confirmed sighting was on January 9, 1947, at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She told the staff she was waiting for someone. She sat in the lobby for hours, and then she walked out the front doors into the night. No one knows where she went next. No one knows who she met. And no one knows what happened in the 6 days before her body appeared in that vacant lot. Those missing days became the heart of the investigation. A void filled with theories, suspects, and secrets. Elizabeth Short wanted to be remembered. She wanted to be seen, but not like this. Never like this. When LAPD detectives arrived at the vacant lot on Norton Avenue, they were met with a sight so disturbing that several officers later admitted they had never seen anything like it. Not in war, not in homicide work, not in their darkest nightmares. The body of Elizabeth Short lay in 2 separate pieces, arranged with a precision that felt almost ritualistic. The grass beneath her was untouched by blood. The ground was undisturbed. Whoever had placed her there had done so carefully, deliberately, and without leaving a trace. The first thing detectives noticed was the cleanliness. Her skin had been washed. Her hair was neatly arranged. There were no drag marks, no footprints, no tire tracks. It was as if the killer had floated above the earth, leaving nothing behind. Then came the surgical detail. Elizabeth's body had been bisected at the waist using a technique known as a hemicorporectomy, a method taught in medical schools, requiring anatomical knowledge and a steady hand. The cut was clean, precise, and executed between the lumbar vertebrae, avoiding bone entirely. This was not the work of an amateur. It was the work of someone who understood the human body intimately. Her face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth toward her ears, creating the infamous Glasgow smile. The cuts were deep, symmetrical, and made while she was still alive. Her wrists and ankles bore ligature marks, suggesting she had been restrained. Her body showed signs of prolonged torture, but no signs of struggle at the scene. This meant one thing: she had been killed elsewhere. The lot was merely the final stage, the killer's gallery. Detectives found no blood, no fingerprints, no weapon, and no personal belongings. The killer had wiped her clean, drained her body, and transported her remains with chilling efficiency. The staging was theatrical, almost artistic, as if the killer wanted the world to see his work and remember it. And the world did. Within hours, the press descended on the scene. Reporters climbed fences, snapped photographs, and shouted questions at detectives. The newspapers sensationalized every detail, turning the crime into a spectacle. Headlines screamed about a sadistic fiend, a mad butcher, a Hollywood monster. The public panicked. Women refused to walk alone. Parents kept their daughters indoors. Rumors spread like wildfire. The LAPD, overwhelmed by the media frenzy, struggled to control the narrative. Every detail leaked. Every theory exploded. Every lead was devoured by reporters before detectives could follow it. And in the middle of the chaos was the body of a young woman who had dreamed of becoming a star, now displayed in death like a grotesque tableau. The crime scene told detectives one thing with absolute certainty: this killer was not impulsive. He was methodical, he was confident, and he wanted attention. The Black Dahlia case had become more than a murder. It was a message, and Los Angeles was listening. From the moment Elizabeth Short's body was identified, the LAPD faced a tidal wave of pressure. The brutality of the crime, the staging, the media frenzy, all of it demanded answers. Detectives needed a suspect, and they needed one fast. But what they found instead was a labyrinth of men, lies, and dead ends. The first wave of suspects came from Elizabeth's own life, the men she had met, dated, or simply crossed paths with in the months before her death. She drifted through Los Angeles, often relying on acquaintances for food, shelter, or companionship. This made the suspect pool enormous. 1. The last man to see her alive, Robert Red Manley. Red Manley, a traveling salesman, was the last confirmed person to see Elizabeth alive. He had picked her up in San Diego and driven her to Los Angeles. He paid for her hotel room, bought her dinner, and dropped her at the Biltmore Hotel on January 9th. The last day she was seen alive. Manley was nervous, inconsistent, and visibly shaken during questioning. But after passing multiple lie detector tests and providing a solid alibi, detectives cleared him. He was guilty of infidelity but not murder. 2. The dozens of false confessors. Within days of the murder, the LAPD was flooded with confessions. Men walked into police stations claiming responsibility. Others sent letters. Some called the newspapers. Most were attention seekers, mentally unstable, or simply fascinated by the case. The LAPD estimated that over 50 people falsely confessed to the crime. Not one of them matched the evidence. 3. The Hollywood doctor George Hodel. Years later, one name would rise above all others. Dr. George Hodel, a wealthy, eccentric physician with a dark reputation. He lived in a mansion known for wild parties, questionable guests, and whispered rumors. He had medical training, enough to perform the precise surgical cuts found on Elizabeth's body. In the 1950s, the LAPD even bugged his home. On the recordings, Hodel made chilling statements, including, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They can't prove it now, but the tapes were inconclusive. No physical evidence tied him to the crime. And after his death, the case against him remained circumstantial, compelling, but unproven." 4. The sadistic surgeon theory. Some detectives believed the killer was a surgeon, someone who had access to medical tools, anatomical knowledge, and a private space to commit the crime. Several doctors were questioned. None were charged, but the theory lingered, fueled by the surgical precision of the dissection. 5. The shadowy figures of post-war Los Angeles. Los Angeles in the 1940s was a city of transients. Soldiers returning from war, drifters seeking work, aspiring actors chasing fame. Many men passed through Elizabeth's life briefly, leaving no records, no addresses, no traceable identities. Any one of them could have been the killer, and any one of them could have vanished into the city the next day. By the end of the first month, the LAPD had interviewed hundreds of men. Some were liars, some were predators, some were simply unlucky enough to know Elizabeth Short. But none of them could be definitively tied to the murder. The case was slipping through the cracks. The killer was still out there, and the city was growing restless. The investigation needed a breakthrough, and soon, as the Black Dahlia murder dominated headlines across Los Angeles, the killer seemed to be watching, and he wanted the world to know it. Just days after Elizabeth Short's mutilated body was discovered, the newspapers began receiving letters. Not ordinary letters, not rants, but messages crafted with a cold, deliberate hand. The first envelope arrived at the Los Angeles Examiner, the newspaper that had sensationalized the case from the moment her identity was confirmed. The letter was assembled from magazine clippings, each word cut out and pasted onto the page, a style that would later echo in the Zodiac case decades later. It read, "Here are Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." Inside the package were items that had belonged to Elizabeth Short: her birth certificate, business cards, photographs, the personal address book, and scraps of paper with names written inside. Every item had been carefully cleaned with gasoline, wiped of fingerprints, wiped of evidence, wiped of any trace of the killer's identity. The precision was chilling. This was not a panicked murderer. This was someone who enjoyed the game. Days later, another letter arrived. Then another, and another. One read, "I will give up on Dahlia killing if I get 10 years. Don't try to find me." Another mocked the police directly, ridiculing their inability to catch him. The handwriting was inconsistent, the tone shifting between arrogance and sarcasm. Some letters were typed, others were handwritten, A few were constructed from clippings. The killer was playing with personas, hiding behind masks, enjoying the chaos he created. The LAPD analyzed every envelope, every stamp, every scrap of paper. They found nothing. No fingerprints, no DNA, no traceable marks. Whoever sent the letters knew exactly how to avoid detection. Then came the most disturbing message of all. A postcard that read, "Turning myself in on January 29th. Had my fun at the police." January 29th came. January 29th went. No one turned themselves in. The killer had lied, or he had changed his mind, or he had simply wanted to watch the city hold its breath. The letters continued for weeks, then months, then abruptly stopped. Some investigators believed the killer grew bored. Others thought he had left Los Angeles. A few suspected he had been arrested for another crime or died. But the damage was done. The letters transformed the Black Dahlia case from a horrific murder into a psychological war. The killer had inserted himself into the narrative, manipulating the press, taunting the police, and feeding the public's morbid fascination. He wasn't just a murderer, he was a performer, and Los Angeles was his audience. The LAPD now faced a terrifying truth. They weren't just hunting a killer. They were hunting someone who wanted to be hunted. By the end of January 1947, the Black Dahlia case had become the biggest story in America. Newspapers printed every rumor. Radio hosts speculated wildly, and the public demanded answers. But behind the scenes, the LAPD was unraveling. The department was already struggling with corruption scandals, political pressure, and a reputation for mishandling high-profile cases. The Black Dahlia murder didn't just expose these weaknesses, it magnified them. The LAPD was overwhelmed from the start. Detectives were pulled from other cases, working around the clock, sleeping in their offices, and drowning in leads. Most of them useless. Every day brought new witnesses, new confessions, new suspects. The noise drowned out the truth. The press made it worse. Reporters bribed officers, stole evidence, and published details before detectives could verify them. Some journalists even arrived at crime scenes before the police. The LAPD wasn't just fighting a killer, they were fighting the media. The case quickly became a battleground inside the department. Detectives competed for control, eager to be the one who solved the most sensational murder in Los Angeles history. Information was hoarded, leads were ignored, and egos clashed. Some officers believed the killer was a surgeon. Others insisted it was a drifter. A few suspected someone powerful, someone the department didn't want to expose. These divisions fractured the investigation, creating blind spots that the killer exploited. Crucial evidence disappeared. Witness statements were misplaced. Crime scene photos were damaged or lost, and some files were never properly logged. The vacant lot where Elizabeth's body was found was never fully secured. Curious neighbors wandered through the scene. Reporters stepped over evidence. Children played nearby. The contamination was catastrophic. Even the letters sent by the killer, cleaned with gasoline, carefully packaged, were handled inconsistently. Some were preserved. Others were touched by multiple officers. A few were nearly discarded. Los Angeles officials wanted the case solved quickly. The brutality of the murder threatened the city's image, especially as Hollywood was becoming the global capital of entertainment. The mayor's office demanded progress. The police chief demanded results. Detectives were pushed to name a suspect, any suspect, to calm the public. This pressure led to rushed interrogations, false accusations, and a growing sense that the investigation was slipping away. By February, just weeks after the murder, some detectives privately admitted the truth. The case was already compromised beyond repair. Too many leads, too many suspects, too much media interference, too much internal chaos. The killer had struck with surgical precision. The LAPD responded with confusion, and as the investigation spiraled, the man responsible for one of the most horrific murders in American history walked free, watching the chaos he had created. Los Angeles in the 1940s was a city of contradictions. Sunshine and shadows, glamour and decay, dreams and predators. For every star who rose, 1,000 others fell into the cracks. And Elizabeth Short was living in those cracks, drifting through a world where danger hid behind every neon sign. Hollywood was booming. Nightclubs pulsed with jazz, liquor, and smoke. Studios churned out films that promised escape from a world still recovering from war. But beneath the surface was a darker ecosystem, one built on exploitation, desperation, and the quiet suffering of young women who came to the city with nothing but hope. Elizabeth moved through this world like a ghost. She frequented bars, lounges, and hotel lobbies, not because she wanted to, but because she had nowhere else to go. She didn't drink heavily, but she was often seen with men who did. Soldiers on leave, drifters, wealthy older men who offered dinners, rides, or a place to stay. Some were harmless, some were not. Hollywood's nightlife was filled with men who preyed on vulnerable women, men who promised roles, connections, or protection. Elizabeth, with her striking looks and soft voice, drew attention everywhere she went. But attention in Hollywood was a double-edged blade. Post-war Los Angeles was overflowing with people who didn't want to be found. Deserters, criminals, con artists, and men who had seen too much overseas. They drifted through cheap hotels, boarding houses, and bars, blending into the noise of the city. Elizabeth crossed paths with many of them. Some knew her name, some only knew her face, some may have followed her. The LAPD later admitted that dozens of men who interacted with her in her final months were never identified. They simply vanished back into the city's underbelly. Hollywood studios controlled everything: the actors, the press, the police, even the scandals. If a rising star got into trouble, the studios cleaned it up. If a powerful man crossed the line, the story disappeared. But Elizabeth wasn't part of that world. She had no studio contract, no agent, no protection. She was on the outside looking in, and the outside was dangerous. In the weeks before her death, Elizabeth was seen with several men: a nightclub promoter, a married businessman, a former soldier with a violent temper, the mysterious man in a dark sedan who picked her up late at night. None of them were ever charged. Some were never even named publicly. But each one became a thread in the tangled web of her final days. Hollywood sold fantasies, but it also devoured the people who believed in them. Elizabeth Short wanted to be someone. She wanted to be seen. She wanted a life bigger than the one she had escaped. Instead, she found herself in a city where beauty was currency, vulnerability was exploited, and predators moved freely in the shadows. And somewhere in that world, in the bars, the hotels, the back alleys, or the quiet rooms where secrets lived, she crossed paths with the person who would end her life. The dark side of Hollywood wasn't just a backdrop. It was a character in her story, and it was closing in. On the morning of January 16, 1947, just one day after her body was discovered, the Los Angeles County Morgue prepared for one of the most disturbing examinations in its history. The autopsy of Elizabeth Short would reveal details so gruesome that many were kept from the public for decades. The pathologist assigned to the case, Dr. Frederick Newbar, was a seasoned professional. He had seen violent deaths, war injuries, and the aftermath of unspeakable crimes. But nothing prepared him for what he found on the table that morning. Elizabeth's body had been washed meticulously. Her skin was scrubbed, her hair cleaned, her nails trimmed. There was no dirt, no debris, no trace of the killer's environment. Whoever murdered her had taken extraordinary care to remove evidence. This wasn't panic. This was control. The most shocking detail was the precise bisection of her torso. Dr. Newbar noted that the cut was made between the second and third lumbar vertebrae, avoiding bone entirely, a technique taught in medical schools and performed in hospitals. This was not improvisation. This was anatomical knowledge. The killer knew exactly where to cut, exactly how deep, exactly how to separate the body cleanly. The autopsy revealed bruising on her wrists, ankles, and neck, evidence she had been bound. There were cuts, abrasions, and lacerations inflicted before death, indicating she had been tortured over a period of time. Her mouth had been slashed into the infamous Glasgow smile while she was still alive. The pain would have been unimaginable. There were also signs of blunt force trauma to the head, blows severe enough to cause unconsciousness, but not death. The killer wanted her alive for what came next. Despite the brutality, the official cause of death was not the bisection. It was hemorrhage and shock from the facial wounds and head trauma. She died slowly. She died in terror. And she died long before her body was staged in the vacant lot. One detail stood out above all others. Elizabeth's body had been posed. Her arms were arranged. Her legs are positioned. Her intestines were tucked neatly beneath her. This wasn't just murder. It was a message. The killer wanted the world to see his work. He wanted the scene to be unforgettable. He wanted attention, and he got it. The autopsy confirmed what detectives feared. The killer had medical knowledge. He had time. He had privacy. And he had a level of cruelty that suggested this was not his first act of violence. But the most chilling detail was this. There were no defensive wounds. Elizabeth never fought back. She never scratched. She never resisted, because she couldn't. She had been subdued, possibly drugged, possibly knocked unconscious, before the torture began. The autopsy left investigators with a terrifying profile. A man with surgical skill. A man with sadistic tendencies. A man who enjoyed control. A man who cleaned his crime scene meticulously. A man who staged the body for maximum shock value. This was not a crime of passion. This was a performance. And the killer had executed it flawlessly. Estimated duration, 4 minutes. The Black Dahlia murder didn't just shock Los Angeles. It ignited a media firestorm unlike anything the city had ever seen. Within hours of Elizabeth Short's identification, the press seized control of the narrative, transforming a brutal homicide into a spectacle of fear, fascination, and sensationalism. And in that frenzy, Elizabeth Short, a quiet, struggling young woman, became something else entirely. Newspapers in the 1940s were locked in a ruthless battle for readership. Crime sold papers. Scandal sold even more, and the Black Dahlia case had everything. Beauty, mystery, brutality, and a killer who seemed to be watching. Reporters didn't just cover the story, they shaped it. They dug into Elizabeth's past, twisting her struggles into salacious headlines. They exaggerated her relationships, invented affairs, and painted her as a femme fatale drifting through Hollywood's underworld. The truth was irrelevant. The myth was more profitable. The name, the Black Dahlia, exploded across front pages. Some claimed it came from a local joke. Others said it was inspired by the film noir The Blue Dahlia. But once the press adopted it, the nickname stuck. Seductive, mysterious, and darkly poetic. Turned Elizabeth into a character. A symbol, a brand. And it erased the real woman beneath. The media didn't just report on the case, they actively disrupted it. They bribed police officers for inside information. They leaked confidential details. They published false leads. They harassed witnesses. They sensationalized every rumor. One newspaper even called Elizabeth's mother, pretending her daughter had won a beauty contest, just to extract personal details for a story. Only after gathering what they wanted did they reveal the truth. Elizabeth was dead. It was cruelty disguised as journalism. The letters sent to newspapers, taunting, mocking, theatrical, only fueled the fire. The press printed them immediately, giving the killer exactly what he wanted. Attention, fear, and a stage. The public devoured every update, every headline, every gruesome detail. The Black Dahlia wasn't just a murder victim anymore. She was a phenomenon. Studios watched the case unfold with morbid fascination. Screenwriters whispered about adapting the story. Directors studied the crime scene photos. Actors speculated about the killer. The line between reality and fiction blurred. The Black Dahlia became part of Hollywood's mythology, a cautionary tale about beauty, ambition, and the city's darker appetites. By February 1947, the case had become bigger than the investigation itself. The press had created a narrative so powerful that it overshadowed the truth. Elizabeth Short was no longer a person. She was a symbol of Hollywood's darkest fantasies. The media circus didn't just distort the case. buried it. And in the noise, the headlines, the rumors, the sensationalism, the killer slipped further into the shadows. The Black Dahlia had become immortal, but justice for Elizabeth Short drifted further out of reach. By February 1947, the Black Dahlia investigation had spiraled into chaos. The LAPD had interviewed hundreds of men, chased dozens of leads, and drowned in a sea of false confessions. But beneath the noise, there were suspects, real suspects, who should have been cornered, questioned harder, or never allowed to walk away. These were the men who slipped through the cracks. 1. The man in the sedan. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Elizabeth Short with a man driving a dark sedan in the days before her disappearance. He was described as clean-cut, mid-30s, and confident. Some said he seemed protective. Others said he seemed controlling. He was never identified, never questioned, never found. The LAPD dismissed the sightings as unreliable. But years later, detectives admitted this man may have been the last person to see her alive, and possibly the one who killed her. 2. The violent ex-soldier. Elizabeth had been seen with a former serviceman known for his temper and his drinking. He had a history of assault. He had been discharged under questionable circumstances. And he had been in Los Angeles at the time of the murder. He was questioned briefly, then released. No follow-up, no deeper investigation. In a city filled with veterans struggling to reintegrate after the war, he blended into the background and disappeared. 3. The nightclub promoter. A smooth-talking promoter who frequented the same bars as Elizabeth. He offered young women opportunities, often in exchange for favors. Several witnesses claimed he had taken an interest in her. Others said he had been rejected and didn't take it well. He had connections, he had influence, and he had a reputation for violence behind closed doors. But he also had friends in high places. The LAPD backed off. 4. The married businessman. Elizabeth had been seen with a wealthy, married man who lived in Los Angeles but kept a second apartment downtown. He was known for his affairs, his temper, and his ability to make problems disappear. When detectives approached him, he denied everything. His wife provided an alibi. The LAPD moved on. But years later, private investigators uncovered inconsistencies in his timeline. Inconsistencies the police never pursued. 5. The medical professional. Several doctors in Los Angeles had the skill to perform the surgical dissection found on Elizabeth's body. One in particular, whose name was quietly removed from early reports, had a history of mental instability and a fascination with anatomy. He lived near the Biltmore Hotel. He owned a private surgical suite. He abruptly left Los Angeles after the murder. The LAPD never tracked him down. 6. The unknown predator. Perhaps the most chilling possibility. Elizabeth may have crossed paths with a man who had no connection to her past, a stranger who saw an opportunity, a man with a medical knowledge, the private space, time to torture, and a desire to stage a body like a work of art. A man who had done this before, or would do it again. The LAPD never connected the Dahlia murder to any other case. But several unsolved homicides from the 1940s and 1950s bear striking similarities. Surgical precision, body staging, and victims who vanished without a trace. A pattern the LAPD missed. The truth is simple and devastating. The killer may have been in plain sight. He may have been questioned. He may have been dismissed. He may have walked out of the station and vanished into the city. The suspects who should have been caught weren't. The leads that should have been followed weren't. And the man responsible for one of the most brutal murders in American history slipped through the cracks of a broken system. The Black Dahlia case wasn't just unsolved. It was lost. Even after decades of investigation, confessions, and sensational headlines, the Black Dahlia case refuses to settle into a single explanation. The evidence is fragmentary, the witnesses unreliable, and the city that produced the crime has 1,000 ways to hide a killer. Over time, a handful of theories hardened into the narratives people return to again and again. Each plausible, each incomplete, each leaving room for doubt. The surgeon theory. The most persistent idea is simple and clinical. The killer had medical knowledge. The clean bisection, the avoidance of bone, and the methodical staging point to someone who understood anatomy and could work with precision. This theory names doctors, morticians, and medical technicians as prime suspects. It explains the surgical cut and the lack of blood at the scene, but it struggles with motive. Skill alone does not explain the sadism, the posing, or the killer's need to communicate through letters. The sadist or ritualist theory. Some investigators view the crime as the work of a man driven by compulsion rather than profession. The staging, the facial mutilation, and the careful arrangement of the body suggest ritual, performance, or a personal signature. This theory frames the murder as an expression of control and exhibitionism. The killer wanted an audience and used the city as his stage. It accounts for the theatrical elements but leaves the question of opportunity and access unresolved. The serial killer hypothesis. A darker possibility is that the Dahlia was one victim among others, part of a pattern that the LAPD failed to connect. Similar cases with surgical precision and posed bodies exist in the era's cold files, but links were never conclusively made. If the killer was mobile, methodical, and selective, he could have struck elsewhere and escaped detection. This theory demands a broader review of unsolved homicides from the period and suggests the possibility of a predator who outlived his crimes. The Hollywood conspiracy. Hollywood's influence on the investigation spawned a theory that powerful men protected one of their own. Studio executives, wealthy patrons, and men with reputations to lose had a motive to suppress scandal. This idea explains why certain leads were dropped and why some suspects seemed to vanish from records. It also feeds public cynicism, but it relies heavily on circumstantial connections and the assumption of coordinated cover-ups. The copycat and hoax problem. The flood of letters, false confessions, and sensational reporting created noise that obscured real leads. Some correspondences were deliberate hoaxes. Others were the work of mentally ill individuals seeking attention. The proliferation of false trails hampered detectives and allowed the true perpetrator to hide in plain sight. This theory highlights investigative failure as much as criminal intent. The forensic limits theory. Finally, there is a pragmatic explanation. In 1947, forensic science had limits. Blood analysis, trace evidence, and DNA were decades away. The crime scene was contaminated by the press and public. Evidence was mishandled. Even the best detectives of the era lacked the tools to extract a modern conviction. This theory is less dramatic but painfully plausible. The case may have been solvable with today's methods, not yesterday's. All these theories survive because the case contains elements that point in different directions. Surgical skill and theatrical staging, intimate knowledge and opportunistic violence, local connections and transient suspects. Each theory explains part of the puzzle and leaves another part exposed. That is why the Black Dahlia continues to fascinate investigators, writers, and armchair detectives alike. The truth may be a single answer that fits all the facts, or it may be a composite. A killer with skill who also craved attention, protected by silence, and enabled by a city that swallowed secrets. Until new evidence emerges, the theories will persist, and the case will remain a mirror reflecting Los Angeles at its most glamorous and most dangerous. The Black Dahlia case did more than shock a city. It rewired American culture. The brutality of Elizabeth Short's murder, the theatrical staging, and the media frenzy turned a single homicide into a national obsession. Newspapers printed every rumor. Hollywood writers mined a story for plot lines. True crime authors and filmmakers returned to the case again and again, each retelling reshaping the public memory of Elizabeth Short and Los Angeles itself. Books, films, and television have kept the Dahlia alive in the public imagination. Writers used the case as a template for noir fiction. Directors borrowed its imagery for cinematic crime. Podcasters and documentarians continue to re-examine the evidence and the suspects. The murder's grotesque visuals and unanswered questions made it irresistible to storytellers, and those retellings amplified the mystery into legend. The investigation exposed limits in mid-century policing, contaminated crime scenes, mishandled evidence, and a press that both aided and obstructed detectives. Over time, the case became a cautionary example in criminal justice circles. A reminder that sensational coverage can destroy leads and that procedural rigor matters when evidence is fragile or scarce. Elizabeth Short's name became a symbol of Hollywood's dark side, of a city that devours its dreamers, and of a media machine that can turn a victim into a caricature. Yet behind the nickname was a young woman with a fractured past, hopes for reinvention, and a life that ended in violence. The cultural legacy is therefore double-edged. The case taught lessons about policing and media ethics, but it also erased the person at the center of the story. Even now, decades later, the case closes on a blank. There is a gap in the record, a stretch of hours and choices between Elizabeth's last confirmed sighting and the discovery of her body that no witness, file, or photograph fills. Investigators reconstructed routes, questioned suspects, and re-examined evidence. But that missing span remains a deliberate silence in the archive, a lacuna where motive, opportunity, and the killer's identity might have lived. The story ends there, not with a final answer, but with an absence that invites every new reader, listener, and investigator to ask the same question again. What happened in the hours that were never recorded?